Well, okay, and welcome everybody. We're at a couple minutes past the hour now, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started for what I know is going to be a really insightful and practical discussion this afternoon. Thanks to everybody for joining. For those of you I don't know, my name is Lisa Schroeder. I cover trade policy for now, but privileged to also serve as the chair of the WIT Trust. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to bring today's session together. For those of you who are familiar with the WIT Trust, that is the charitable arm of the WIT DC, Professional Networking Association, and it's also the group that administers WIT's scholarship program. That's a program I'm delighted to say we're using this event as kind of a kickoff for the fall. It's a great opportunity for basically an essay-based contest where students, junior or senior year of undergrad or in graduate school who are studying international trade can apply for what is a $1,500 one semester term scholarship. More importantly, it's a great opportunity for students to get involved and get engaged with WIT, both as working with a WIT mentor, also becoming a WIT member, and most importantly, kind of the fun new aspect that we've added is putting together a session based on the essay topic, but one that actually gives our students, our scholarship winners, some visibility. That session will be coming up. One of our spring winners wrote on global health policy. We've got that session coming up in October, and I'm hoping you all will join. For those of you either in school or anybody out of school who knows students, please feel free to publicize. I'll put a link to the WIT Trust Scholarship Program in the chat. It'd be great to have you remind students this opportunity is open. We're taking submissions until the 1st of November. And then we can let the student winners know by the middle of December as a wonderful holiday present. But part of running the scholarship program, we really also as the trust want to focus more on sharing skills. And that's exactly the reason why we put together today's communications workshop. It's the opportunity to talk through what most of us do on a daily basis, whether it's writing briefing memos or talking points, even the kind of email notes that are going out across leadership teams. There's a lot of writing involved in what we do, and this is a great opportunity to think about how we can do better, particularly because we've got two incredible experts to hear from today. I'm going to start really quick bio. We have Jennifer Chu from the Embassy of Canada. Jennifer is the second Secretary of Trade Policy at the Embassy, and in her role provides strategic advice to senior management on a wide range of trade priorities, including USMCA. Clearly comes naturally to her, as previously before the Embassy, Jennifer was at Global Affairs Canada as a member of the NAFTA negotiating team. That covered things, everything from policy coordination to providing strategic communications. And we know how difficult it can be to communicate on a trade agreement, especially in negotiations. We have as well Hannah Waldron with us. Hannah is the writer and editor for the Office of Trade at Customs and Border Protection. And that's a critical role, communicating the Office of Trade messages, both public and private sector stakeholders. So in that role, Hannah's really driving the way CBP and the Office of Trade is communicating everything from tough topics like forced labor to intellectual property rights, trade modernization, and more. And she's been sharing a lot of these skills with her colleagues, driving communication seminars within the department too. Prior to joining CBP, Hannah taught both English and French to students in the United States and France, which demonstrates not only great capability to communicate directly on tough issues like trade, but across cultures too, another factor that plays into the work that many of us do here in DC. So we're thrilled to have Hannah and Jennifer leading us off what I know is going to be a very interactive conversation. This is a meeting format Zoom, so we welcome thoughts, questions, comments. Please feel free to populate those in the chat or the Q&A. And when it gets to the open discussion period, please feel free to raise your hand, get on your camera, and join us directly so that you can ask your question directly to our speakers. Now I'm going to stop and I'll turn it over to Jennifer to kick us off.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks so much for having us. I'm really happy to be doing this seminar with Hannah for WIT, and especially because I've benefited so much from the WIT community over the last couple of years in my time in DC. Just a little bit more about myself. I've had a career that spanned a couple of different things. I've worked as a journalist. I've also worked in government for a long time, and I will say that I've had to do different types of writing throughout my career. And it's always been very clear to me that, good writing skills, the ability to distill information, the ability to kind of write quickly, they're very important skills to have no matter what job you're doing. So I'm really happy to kind of share with everybody my tips and hopefully to kind of help people along their way on their journey for as writers as well. Hannah, I just hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you both for the introduction. Equally delighted to be here with all of you today. As we put these slides that you'll see in a moment together, we were really thinking about, we have a short amount of time to communicate on this vast topic of writing. So we really hope that you'll come away with some of the most critical skills and information that we can pass on to you in this short amount of time that we have for really anything and everything that you're writing. As Jennifer mentioned, there are so many deliverables that we all touch upon every day in our work. And of course, we developed today's program with the scholarship in mind, but hope that you can take away some tips and tricks that we've learned along the way to apply to anything and everything. As Lisa mentioned, something as small as an email can benefit from some of the best practices that we'll cover today. And as Lisa mentioned too, I've been training folks, and on our team, I've trained nearly 900 people in the past year on some of the best practices that we're going to look at today. And I hope that you will come away with something that you can tangibly implement into the work that you do, no matter what that is. So with that, I think we can pop the slides on the screen and go to slide 2. Great. So let's get right into it. So writing process. Again, this is a vast topic, right? We could spend our entire lifetime trying to perfect writing, and we'd still have more to learn. But when it comes to writing, there are a few best practices that we feel can be applied across the board, no matter what you're doing. And if you can really nail these, you're going to set yourself up for success pretty much every time. And the first best practice in writing is that it takes place in kind of a 3-phased approach. And that approach is planning, writing, and editing. And, most of us have seen this at some point, maybe in high school or even 8th grade, right? This is not new. But we really want to emphasize that in this kind of busy, crazy world where we have these fast-paced deadlines, you absolutely cannot skip any of these phases. And we've done a little bit more than that, and we've broken down planning into a few subsections to really emphasize how important this particular phase is. And so the first one is brainstorming, right? This is really just when you're kind of getting your ideas generated, trying to make sense of a concept. So making a concept into something tangible. And so a few things that you can ask yourself during this phase is, what am I trying to accomplish? What is my objective? Who am I writing for? What do they need from me? And really importantly, what can I provide to them? What value can I give to them? So we really want to be thinking during this time, or be reminded that, we live in an environment where everyone is oversaturated with information. And so it's really in this phase that we have to be very clear on what our intentions are and what we can tangibly bring to our audience. So being very clear, who is that audience? What am I trying to get from them? What can I give to them is going to be critical to know during this process. And then of course, do I have a template or a structure that I can already use? If I don't, this is a really important time to think about, based on what I'm trying to accomplish, am I trying to persuade somebody of something? Am I trying to get money from somebody? Whatever I'm trying to accomplish, the structure that I use is going to reinforce that message or that need that I have. And so I need to think critically about what that structure is going to be so that it can support the audience and the objective that I've outlined. And really quickly, I want to call out as well, this is something that I find really interesting. I recently took a training on writing for non-readers. And one of the things that they call out is that 100% of your readers skim. They're not reading every word. And so when we talk about structure, we need to talk about what visual elements are we putting into our writing that help to structure our readers' attention, gain our readers' attention, subsections, headers, etc. So this is a really good time to think about what are the time constraints of my audience, who is my audience, and how can I hold their attention both visually and through the language that I'm using. Outlining. So once we have our structure, it's great to come up with my bottom line, or, if we're talking about an academic essay, like the WIT scholarship, my thesis. So, this word is kind of interchangeable depending on what environment you're working in, but you need to know what your bottom line is before you start writing. And your bottom line it's your key message. It's what's the point. If you don't know this before you start writing, your paper or whatever you're writing risks being kind of all over the place. So you need to identify your bottom line message or your thesis before you put pen to paper, because everything else that you write will fall into place to support that bottom line or to support that thesis. And if you're not clear on that before you start writing, your reader will not be clear on it either. And of course, as you're outlining, you want to identify those messages or those arguments or any background context that will support that bottom line as well. So this is really where you're coming up with your bones, your skeleton for what you're writing. And then of course, coming up again with any of those, those little tips of visually structuring your paper to assist your readers' comprehension or absorption of your material. So if you walk away with anything today, I personally think that it should be know your message, know what you're trying to say before you say it. Don't figure it out as you're going, right? Know it before you start to write and before you start putting pen to paper, and know what value you bring to your audience. And I know that Jennifer will talk a little bit more about our audience in a little bit. So I'll let her kick off the rest of the bullets on this slide, and then we'll cover more of this in depth as we move forward.
Thanks, Hannah. So Hannah talked about the importance of having, your thesis, your key arguments. The next stage is research, right, which is to basically find the facts, find the arguments, everything that's happened to kind of support your thesis and to support your arguments. Because I think in general, you're not going to necessarily know everything about your topic, but it's really important for you to have the relevant background and to know what others have said about the issue. And those are, things that will end up helping to support your thesis. In government, we talk a lot about what's the current context, what's the current political climate, what's happening in current events. And that's extremely important, because you could be writing a paper on a particular topic and having, let's say about preparing for a global health crisis, right? Doing it in this day and age versus if you had done it 10 years ago, there'd be very different. You'd have very different arguments. You'd be looking at very different information. So it's always very important to know, why is my particular topic important given the current state of affairs in the world or in the country? How much background do you need to provide a well-written piece without overdoing it? I mean, I think that one is a very difficult thing to gauge until you kind of are getting into the research and until you start writing. I think that sometimes when you look at briefing memos and whatnot, there are things that are in the background that start from the beginning, and other times they don't, right? It's the same thing that we see in news stories, like things, information that's already been kind of given because we've been living it for a while. Think about what it is that you need to do, what kind of background you need to provide without kind of going too much into the past or into the weeds about details that you don't necessarily need. Always very important. Generally, when you're writing, whether it be a newspaper article, a memo, or an email, or an essay, the most important piece of information is the new information. What is it that is not known or people don't already know or not known to your particular audience, and present that as your most important piece of information and structure that could in many ways be your thesis. It may not be, but in many ways you have to kind of make sure that you prioritize presenting the new information over looking at stuff that's happened in the past. The next step is the most important one, writing. I think in terms of, there's a lot of different styles. People have different styles in how they write. I've heard of people who have basically kind of started writing and done a data dump, and they write everything on a piece of paper and then they revisit it the next day. And it could have been really terrible what they wrote the day before, but at least it's done and they have a starting point. When I used to work as a journalist, I wasn't able to write my article until I figured out my very top sentence. And then I could flow onwards from that. So I think, there's different types of writing styles that all work for work for everybody. And, you have to kind of figure out what your style is, but there's no right or wrong way to write, just to keep doing it and to work at it. The fifth part of the writing process, also equally important, editing, reviewing, rewriting. You have to review for obvious reasons, to check for spelling and grammar mistakes, to check to see if you have accomplished your goal of presenting your thesis and supporting your thesis. Do your arguments make sense? And then don't just do it yourself. Get other people to help you, right? Copy editing has always been a very important part of many different writing processes, and don't be shy about asking your friends or your colleagues or others for help. I think we can go on to the next slide, and I'm going to hand it back over to Hannah.
Great. Okay, so once again, we only have so much time, right? And writing is so big, so we can't cover all the things. So what we really want to focus on are these few things that we feel like if you nail them, if you can really get them, this will apply across the board, no matter what you're writing. And I really can't stress enough or come back to this idea enough of knowing your bottom line, knowing your key message, or, if it's an academic paper, your thesis, ideally, again, before you put pen to paper. Because once you have this concept outlined in your head or on paper, everything else falls into place. If you don't know what your bottom line is, you're going to be all over the place. But once you have your bottom line, once you have your key messages, the few things that you're really trying to communicate to your audience, all you have to do after that is find the evidence and the information that supports it. So what does it mean? What is a bottom line, right? A bottom line or a key message or a thesis, whatever you want to call it, is if you have, this vast concept or a full paper or an annual report or a WIT scholarship essay, if you whittled that down into 1 to 3 sentences, that's your bottom line. It's the part of your paper or your document, whatever it is, that you cannot do without. Without it, you've got nothing, right? It is ultimately what you want your reader to walk away with. If they walk away with nothing else, it should be this bottom line or this message you're trying to send. I deserve funding because we're a great program because, right? And a great way to think about this is, if I had to write a newspaper headline about what I'm writing, what would it say? Newspaper headlines are great at getting straight to the point right away. And I'm not talking about, the sensationalized ones that are just drawing in your attention. Generally, when you see a newspaper headline, you know exactly what you're going to read, to the extent where most people don't feel like they have to read the article. That's what a good bottom line does. It says, if you walk away right now after having read my bottom line, I still would have gotten the point across. I still would have gotten the message across. So being clear on what that is going to be really important. And when you're brainstorming what your bottom line is going to be, you really want to go through those questions of What value am I bringing to you, reader? What information am I giving you that you need? Or why should you care? If you fail to include that in your bottom line or your message, you risk losing your reader's attention. So making sure that not only do you have a message that you're trying to send, hey, this information is important, or hey, this is what I think or feel, but here's why you should care, or here's how it impacts you. So all of the things on the screen now are just ways that you can kind of brainstorm how to develop key messaging for your document and what you're really trying to communicate or say in whatever deliverable you're working on. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick example. If you look at the original writing, the paragraph versus the revised, immediately you see, just from a visual perspective, there's a difference in how long one is, right? One is longer, one is shorter. And that means that the level of detail is different as well. So if you read through this, and let me see, I think my screen cuts it off a little. Here we go. So there are various partner government agencies such as Department of Justice and Department of State, and private organizations like non-governmental organizations that have a stake and a role in combating forced labor around the world. Some organizations like DOS and DOJ focus their efforts on policy development, while the International Labor Organization and Department of Labor have both contributed a significant amount of research regarding the products most likely to be made using forced labor. Blah, 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 blah. It continues to tell you, the roles that different players have in combating forced labor. Now, in the bottom, what I've done is I've simply summarized this. I've reduced it. I've whittled it down to the bottom line. If I were told that I only had a tweet to communicate this, I only had so many words, then I could take this whole paragraph and I could revise it to say what's in the revised, which is U.S. Customs and Border Protection depends on the support of multiple partner government agencies and non-governmental organizations to receive critical information regarding forced labor and to keep products made with forced labor from entering the U.S. supply chains. So why am I showing you this example? I'm showing it to you for a few different reasons. One, if you are editing something and you realize that you aren't clear on your own message, this is a good exercise for you to do. If I had to reduce my paper into just a sentence or two sentences, what would it be? That's a way for me to decide my bottom line after the fact. This is also a really good example of how, what if I just popped this revised sentence above the original? That would set the stage really nicely, right? It would call out to my reader, here's what I'm about to talk about, and here's why you should care. I'm about to talk about the roles that partner government agencies play in preventing forced labor from entering supply chains. I've added value there. I've told you, hey, reader, it's important for you to know this because this is preventing forced labor from entering your supply chains. I could expand on that. I could say, this helps protect vulnerable workers around the world. It helps to protect American businesses if I wanted the value to be even stronger. But if I put this at the top of that paragraph, this is a great way to call your bottom line or your message out way up front so that your reader is crystal clear on what they're about to read. And one thing I like to say about key messaging is that, I imagine that you're not here because you're writing mystery novels, right? If you are, that is so awesome and we should be in touch. But in general, you're here because you're writing for your professional lives, or you're writing as a student. And we are not in the business of hiding what we're trying to do or say. So coming up with something that's crystal clear and that just gets straight to the point very quickly and very succinctly is the best way to communicate ideas. So have that bottom line, put it right up front, and then everything else will follow. Next slide, please. Okay, so tweets, social media. This is a great example of how to write a bottom line or how to have key messaging. tweets are, a great exercise in that we only have so much real estate. We have 288 characters to get our point across. And you notice in these two tweets, quick plug for the Office of Trade. If you don't follow us on Twitter, please do, at cbptrade.gov. But you realize in these tweets, I've highlighted there's a value add. There's a reason why we think you, the reader, should care. So the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism allows CBP to work with the trade community to strengthen international supply chains and increase border security. So we're assuming that you care about the strength of international supply chains and border security. And we're telling you right away, hey, this is why we do. And hey, reader, this is why it adds value for you. And you can easily see if I decided that I wanted to write an entire essay or an issue paper or a briefing memo on this topic, I've already called out to the reader exactly what's going to be included and exactly what they should expect. And that's what a good bottom line or a key message does. It identifies the topic, what I'm talking about, the action associated with that topic. So in this case, it's a partnership, right? And then the benefit that you can attribute to your reader. So I really like, thinking about this. If you're brainstorming, if you're trying to figure out what your bottom line is or what you have to impart to your audience, think about, well, if I had to write this as a tweet, what would I say? And then you can go from there. Once you have your tweet, once you have your sound bite, you can go about identifying, okay, what am I talking about? What action am I talking about? What's the value? And now I can go about looking for information to support that and to, add more detail and to strengthen it. So with that, I'm gonna pop the mic over to Jennifer, and she's gonna talk a little bit more about how to tailor this messaging or whatever you're writing for your audience.
Thank you. So the idea of knowing your target audience, you are going to want different audiences to do different things. The best communicators are the ones that adjust their messaging to basically the situation and the audience, and they don't just recycle writing that they've already done in the past, right? So it's very important, in order to kind of get to your bottom line, to get your point across, to think about what is it that you like, what kind of audience you're dealing with. And that includes understanding your audience's familiarity with a particular topic. Do you need to give them background? How much should you back up on a particular subject, to the beginning, to the middle? That's very important. It's, sometimes, something that we want to think about for our audiences, we want to tell them something, but a lot of times, especially in government or in others, in other situations, we also want to find out something from, our audience. So think about, when you're dealing with a particular audience, is there a question that you want to give to them, like that you want to ask of them? We're not talking about rhetorical questions here. Avoid those verbally and in writing, but what is it in terms of information that you want from them that will help you? Not a strategy that applies every time, but if an audience is already familiar with a subject, is there a new compelling piece of information that you can bring to them that they didn't already know? This happens a lot, I think, when we talk about the impact of a particular action on, like, let's say your government or on, your family or whatnot. People might understand what the larger topic is, but they don't know that, there could be a unanticipated consequence. I also wanted to kind of, say that as part of your target, thinking about your target audience, I think that sometimes, less so in government, but people are shy to say exactly what they want. But it's also very important to kind of know, is there an ask you have of your audience? And don't be shy about it. If there is a call to action, like we see that a lot in all different types of writings. You see that in government notes and memos. We see that in political ads. We see that in public service announcements. It's important for you to be upfront about your ask. It's important that the ask is simple, that it's direct, and that it's within that person's power or ability to execute. Can I have the next slide, please? So I wanted to give a couple of examples of why it's important to tailor the information to a particular audience and not to kind of just use the same information. So the CPTPP was an agreement that I worked on when I was in Canada at Global Affairs Canada. And we had to think about the kind of information that we were going to present to different groups. And we knew upfront that we were not going to be giving the same information to Canadians that we were going to be giving to foreign investors, to businesses, and to other different types of audiences. So this was an example. I pulled this off of our website of key messages that we gave to Canadian businesses. We wanted them to understand why the new agreement at the time, why it was important, how it was going to help them, and why they should be excited about it and use it. So, I mean, I don't need to go through it, but I just highlighted a couple of really key messages so that you can see that how we distilled it to the most basic information. Reduce tariffs, right? Makes exporting less expensive. Access to a trading bloc that is 13.5% of global GDP, improve protection and predictability and transparency, right? So all very simple messages that we wanted businesses to take away. Can I have the next slide, please? So same agreement, CPTPP, but different audience. This is for foreign investors, so companies that we wanted to invest in Canada from the CPTPP countries. Information that I think that regular Canadians would generally know, but we don't expect investors to know. So, for example, we have here, all of the basic information about Canada, how we have competitive tax rates, a good R&D environment, very educated workforce. The bottom example is another one of, if you're an investor and you want to, from the Asia Pacific, the CPTPP agreement gives you greater certainty and transparency for your investments. So really, those are your bottom lines that we put up top to put, I guess, as part of Hannah's point, that we put it up top so that we can make it very clear, this is why this is important to you. Can I have the next slide, please? So I put a couple more examples here for you. This slide is mostly to kind of show you that it's actually quite normal to be very upfront about the ask that you have of people. So when you have a target audience, not to be shy about what exactly do you want them to do that is a benefit. So I think the first slide that's on the top left corner is an infographic that I pulled off that, that the government of Canada put out for all Canadians, right? Very simple, right? What do we want them to do to help as part of, decreasing, in reaction to COVID-19, keep physical distancing, wash your hands, wear a mask, all of those very simple upfront, active tense, very, very easy to understand. I'm going to skip the example that's kind of below it, but then I'm going to go to the example that you can kind of see is from the Semiconductor Industry Association. That is a letter that I pulled off where it was a letter that they sent to the president, just talking about some of the challenges that their industry have been facing over the last couple months. And right there in the letter, it's very clear what they want them to do, right? So they set up the letter by, giving a little bit of background, why it's important to kind of, why their industry is important to the administration's agenda. And then there's that ask. We urge you to include in your recovery, I think it's budgeting, increased funds and incentives for the semiconductor manufacturing in the form of grants, research, and whatnot. So I think, it's very clear. We see letters like that all the time. And I think it's actually something that when audiences see it, it's kind of a relief to them because they understand like exactly what point it is you're trying to get across. I think I'm going to move on to the next slide. And next, thank you. So I think we had started off the presentation with the writing process, and just talking about the importance of brainstorming to determine your objective, and then outlining your writing and including a thesis and key arguments. I think that, as Hannah had said, like in general, we're not working on creative writing samples. We're not writing a mystery novel. We're writing for a purpose, and we're writing generally for work. So a lot of times we are asked to follow a prescribed format. And I think always importantly, it's important to kind of think about, as part of your outlining and research and brainstorming process, like the first 3 steps, is to think about what exactly do you need to make sure you do? Like, have instructions been issued to you upfront and that you must follow? And if you don't follow them, like, will you have accomplished your goal? And so we wanted to go back to the scholarship program, which is the reason we wanted to do this seminar for our students and our scholarship, I guess, applicants. So we pulled this off of the website. So this is, the WIT scholarship program made it very clear to applicants what they were looking for from the essays. So, for example, I've highlighted them. Essays must be a relevant international trade topic. It must include a thesis statement. It must provide critical analysis of the topic, including a review of both sides of the issue and a strong defense of the essay's main thesis. So, very clearly for this writing exercise, there were instructions that were told to the applicants up front. And, just a lot of times, this isn't always the case with the writing that we do, but a good amount of the time it is, like, where we get instructions on what we are told to accomplish, what we need to cover, for example, in an email or a memo, or, what topics we have to have in there. So always a good idea to kind of heed those requirements and instructions. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Hannah.
Thank you. I want to point out one thing too. For those of you for whom writing does not come naturally, this exercise of taking a look at instructions and really literally highlighting or underlining what's being asked of you, I think helps to make writing more formulaic. And I think everything that we're talking about today helps to make writing more formulaic. Again, for people for whom this isn't natural, it can be a little bit more like math this way, right? By giving yourself a checklist. This is the right answer. The right answer is when you have all of the things that are on this checklist that you've made for yourself, all of the things that are required in good writing. Did I follow the process? Check. Do I have a thesis statement or a bottom line? Check, right? We're giving you tools and tricks that you can literally take with you to make what can be a really kind of esoteric and vague conceptual exercise for many of us into something that is a little bit more palatable and actionable. So can we go to the next slide, please? So what we did is we took the bare bones from last year's scholarship winner to just show you what it looks like to successfully identify the most important parts of a product to help you create a framework for yourself to then begin writing. So Jennifer talked about writing for your audience and talked about the background. So in this particular example, the author decided to put her background right up front. At work, in professional settings, I know Jennifer and I talked about how in our jobs, we have templates where we're asked to put the background information at the very end. So in this case, it's at the beginning, it might be the end, you might work it in. The bottom line is your audience will likely need background of some sort. And so it's your job as a writer to decide where within the spectrum of expertise does my reader fall? And the level of detail that you include in that background section is going to depend on, your reader's expertise. It might change the language that you include. So I think this background is actually very accessible to both experts and non-experts if you read through it. The words that she uses are accessible. The terms she uses are accessible. So this would be a good example of background information that just helps orient the reader. Again, it could be first, it could be last, it could be embedded into your key messages, but ultimately you will need to provide context to your reader. Next slide. So this paper was honestly like the best example that we could have possibly asked for in terms of being able to easily identify the thesis, which of course in a professional environment, we're calling our bottom line or our key message, and then the arguments which would be our supporting details. So I don't want you to be thrown off. You know, if you're not here because you're writing a scholarship essay and you're here just because, you know, you're writing for work, don't be thrown off by the word thesis, you know, or argument. Because again, the bare bones of, you know, I think it was several pages, up to 10 pages long, of this paper, they're going to be very similar to the bare bones of anything that you write for work. We could call it a thesis, we could call it a bottom line, whatever we call it. If you take a look at this, it's amazing. In this paper, I will argue that local manufacturing and technology transfer, ... She's literally hitting you, reader, over the head. Like, hey, just in case like you're asleep or you're doing like a million other things on your phone, let me make this crystal clear. Here is what I'm about to tell you. She says, I will argue. I love it. It's amazing. I don't have to guess. I know what's about to happen. At work, we can't always do that. You know, on our websites, when we're writing content, we're not going to say, on this page, you will now see, right? But the way that we write and communicate, it should be that obvious. It should feel to the reader like we are like blasting them with obvious clarity of about what they're about to see. We can do that with visuals. We can do that with bold text. We do that with the language we use. One thing I want to call out specifically for this thesis and these arguments is that we do have some technical language here. We've got, you know, we refer to Regulation 1010. We use the word contravene, which is a pretty big word, I think, that not everyone is going to be familiar with. I know you're all trade experts, but if you're writing for the public, you're probably going to have to spell that out. So that's an example of, you know, if my audience changes from the brilliant women who are reviewing my scholarship essay, who are experts on trade, to I'm now translating this to a web page, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to spell out what intellectual property rights are and how they benefit American businesses. I'm going to spell out the general agreement on tariffs and trade. So she's done a really great job writing for her audience. She knows that, you know, the WIT reviewers of this essay know what these are. But if we were to translate this over to the web, we'd change that up a little bit. What we really wanted to call out here, though, is that if you take a look at this thesis and you take a look at these arguments, if I, in my brainstorming session or my planning session, if this is all I can come up with, if all I can come up with is a strong bottom line or a strong thesis, and then the arguments that I need to support that bottom line, how easy is my job now? Now that I know that all I need to do for the next 10 pages, 2 pages, 288 characters, whatever it is, all I need to do now is find evidence that supports, you know, why, or let me see, to solve this argument, it supports why this argument is beneficial. So she also literally calls out the value by saying the benefit will be twofold. Now all she has to do is find statistics, data, information that fleshes this out and supports it. So hopefully what this exercise has done is just showed you that if you can come up with this information on the back end, you make your life so easy. So the takeaways are, right, coming up with my key messaging, coming up with my bottom line in just a few sentences so I can outline and flesh out my paper and know my audience, because then the language that I use, the data that I use, the statistics that I use to support those arguments and to support those bottom lines will be directly tailored for that audience, their time constraints, their expertise, etc. So I know we're running out of time, so let's go to the last slide. I want to make sure that we have some time for questions. I don't think that we don't have much to say about this slide. Just wanted to keep it on the board for you all, so that you can take it in and for awareness. And with that, I think we're ready to turn it over for any questions that we might have.
Hannah, Jennifer, this has been fantastic. I know you guys, this is a real whirlwind tutorial. And I know we've got a very active group. So a reminder, everybody, you can put your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and ask directly. But maybe to kind of kick off, I wanted to pick up, and Hannah, where you were just leaving off, and Jennifer, you had mentioned this too. As we're thinking about, how you're trying to write for your reader and what your own styles are, I think one of the things a lot of us struggle with is how do you learn to adapt to the style like of a new boss, new leadership, different types of professors. They like to process information in different ways. So as you were talking about, I'm curious kind of the ideas or lessons learned from both of you in terms of how you can adapt kind of your writing style to the need, particularly when you're trying to either get a good grade or influence your leadership, get some decision making done. How do you adapt to your readers' communication needs, not just your style?
I can start by answering that. So I think it's really important to be able to adapt to your audience, and whether it be like, I kind of had said that you can't just necessarily recycle the same, even for the same topic, you can't recycle the same piece of writing that you have for one audience to the next. And I think that, one of the things I look at when you're kind of getting into your target audience, examples, right? A lot of times you might have an example that proves your point, and the most effective kind of example would be if it's a local example, something that would have probably happened during, the audience's lifetime, something that happens in where the region that they're living in, something that basically helps to personalize that piece of writing and make them care more, because examples that would affect their family, affect themselves, affect their constituents, all of those just help to make your arguments that much more effective. I think in terms of working in government and having to adapt to different templates, I think by and large, while we have different templates that we have to use, like, I think that the writing is generally the same, right? It still has, every single briefing note I've worked on in the last decade in government still has key messages, still has an ask, still has a background section. So I think that in terms of how you adjust, it's more important to kind of think about what value add you can think about to make that piece of writing more relevant. And not necessarily worry so much about templates or, adjusting too much.
I think those are really great points of these key messages that we hope you'll walk away with today really should apply to any and all deliverables and any and every leader that you have. And, in my job, we are constantly adjusting to different leadership styles. And I would say the biggest piece of advice that I have, and I'm always surprised at how, I think, timid people can be when it comes to this, is ask questions. Ask your leaders what their preferences are. Don't be afraid to do that. They are just as set on communicating the way they want to communicate as you are to getting their voice, right? So my advice would be, ask intentional questions, ask the questions that you really need to get their tone and to get their style. The other thing I would say is listen to them when they speak. When they speak, how are they communicating? What information are they intentionally including or excluding? There will definitely be leaders who, are more set on that overarching high-level theme, key message kind of thing, and others who really just want the stats, right? So if you listen to them and you listen to what they decide to include and exclude, you'll get a good sense of their tone and their voice and all of that. So yeah, but nothing beats establishing a relationship where you can ask a question and can ask for feedback. So that would be my 2 cents on that question.
That's great. That's worth at least 4 cents and very, very good insight. I think as both of you have mentioned too, and Jennifer, you just did, templates staying the same, always key messages, always the background, or always the overview, always the impact, the why we care. One of the things I know, speaking for myself personally, is always a bit of a struggle is how we turn these really complex issues into one-pagers, especially when you've got that need. How do you whittle it down to all the essential elements versus everything that you want to be saying? Value guidance, maybe Hannah, you want to start first. What would be guidance in terms of thinking about how to make complex issues a one-pager?
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I told myself, if there's anything I have to say, it's what I'm about to say. And I just totally forgot to say it this whole time, which is that good writers make complicated things simple, and not so good writers make simple things complicated. So that really is, what we're striving for, is making something complex into something simple. And what I find the easiest way to do this is to go through that tweet exercise. If I had to say this in a tweet, how would I say it? If I didn't have 7 pages to write this and I only had 288 characters, what would the critical words, actions, actors be? You'd be surprised, when I tell myself I have to summarize this. If I have a lot of thoughts, okay, well, what if I summarized this into 2 to 3 sentences? And I would challenge you, to not think about it as a page. Think about it first as 2 to 3 sentences. Think that I have, this much real estate to get my point across. And then you realize you really can do that for just about anything. So, thinking about what would the newspaper headline be if I were to write this? All of those, I think, are really great exercises, because it gets you to the bare bones of, if my reader walks away with anything, what does it have to be? And from there, you can decide on that one page, okay, what else can take up the real estate? But think about the tweet, think about a newspaper headline, and think about summarizing it into 1 to 3 sentences.
Yeah, so I'm just going to echo what Hannah says. It's going back to those fundamentals of knowing your audience, knowing your 1 to 3 key messages, knowing if you have an ask, and really, shaping, I guess, your one pager around that. I mean, the truth is that we don't have unlimited time or space anymore for whatever kind of writing we do. The idea that we have to distill everything into one pager is probably generally the constraints that we work with in day-to-day life. So a good kind of way to think about it is just newspaper articles are the same, right? They have to get the information. They expect that when you read a newspaper article, you might read the first 5 paragraphs and then leave the rest. All right. So your first 5 paragraphs have to be the ones that have the brand new information, the why you should care. And I think that if you just think about prioritizing your key messages and what's new, background in general can probably take a little bit. You need a little bit of background for context, but background in general can usually take a backseat.
I really appreciate that. And I know we're coming close to the end, so maybe kind of as a wrap-up question, and it builds on what we were just talking about too. Obviously communications have changed a lot, even just in the past decade. We used to do, some of us still have to do, those big briefing books where you'd have everything printed out and you had to FedEx them to people. Now a lot of times it's emailing it to someone's iPad, or just as you were describing, Hannah, how we've transitioned a lot of our messaging of, it's no longer that, the top 3 speech elements, it's a tweet. And I'm curious, I'm picking up on what you were just saying, especially about newspapers. I have to admit, that's one of my favorite resources, is not just reading the newspaper, but reading 2 different newspapers and comparing why that headline, why this story, why that's above the fold, etc. Like that's a good way to keep skills fresh. And I'm curious, either one of you have advice for our audience too on what are the one or two things you can do to kind of keep those skills fresh and keep learning outside of this fantastic workshop, of course. Jennifer?
Sure. So I will say that maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I took a social media training seminar that was given at my workplace, and then we had an exercise where we had to like repeatedly write tweets, and ensuring that it was at 140 characters at the time, and it was very difficult, and we had to kind of pick up on, like, we had to look at Twitter to pick up on the, you know, basically the terms that were being used and the shortcuts that were being used. And I have to say that that was probably one of the most helpful seminars I've ever taken, as a, like, you know, communications professional, because it really did help me to, you know, first of all, come to my bottom line, but second, adapt my writing, right? Figure out that you know, that if I'm going to continue to be relevant, if I'm going to continue to be successful, I have to adapt to new technologies. And, you know, Twitter is, I find, one of the ways that most people get their news this, you know, today and age. And really, I go there first if I want to know breaking news. I think the other thing is just, like, as you said, Lisa, reading different types of writing, right? You know, newspapers, if you're reading a newspaper, read stuff from the financial section, hard news, the longer pieces they do. I've also taken up podcasts as a way to kind of learn as well. And the podcasts, it's funny because it's not necessarily just about writing, but when you hear really good podcasts, especially the ones like, you know, from the New York Times, The Daily, you can hear the journalists talking in a way that they're speaking in a way that basically just gets the information out very succinctly, the most important things out without repeating themselves. And it's something that I'm still trying to work on. But it is a way that, you know, I can hear other professionals who've worked on it and who've taken training or whatnot. It's just, it's a way to develop my skills personally.
It's a great suggestion. Hannah, final tip from you?
I would just encourage people to not think of writing as something that stops once you're done writing. Communication is a part of every minute of every day of our lives, you know, and I'm thinking about how to best communicate to my partner. I'm thinking about how to best communicate to my cat who doesn't speak English. You know, like, we're always communicating in different scenarios. And just to be mindful at all times, what does this person need from me? What's going on in their head? What's going on in my head? How do I bridge that gap? Kind of breaking down that process and watching it happen more than just when I'm writing is really helpful. That way, when I am writing, the thought process is never stopped. I'm always engaged. And it's just a continuation of every moment of every day. So that would be my tip, is just tune in to what the people around you are asking for and what they need for you in every moment, and tune into how you can channel that into when you write. It's really no different.
That is such great advice. Jennifer and Hannah, thank you both so much for taking us through this. We really appreciate the time and effort, and particularly the learnings. Thanks to everybody who participated. If you haven't already seen, and this weekly this week is promoting this, we do have our annual awards event. Will be October the 12th, virtually still because of the world that we're living in, but that doesn't mean it'll be any less fun. We're celebrating some amazing women. And there's going to be some pretty cool features too, like a cocktail kit. So hoping to see everybody there. Urge you to register, sign up for the event soon. And in the meantime, thanks again to Hannah and Jennifer. Thanks for helping us kick off this season of the scholarship program, especially. Appreciate everyone's help to broadcast that out to students so that we can do everything that we can to really help support the next generation of trade leaders. Thanks for participating today.
Thank you.